Turning now to the Israel-Hamas war, and the Israeli military has ordered the immediate evacuation of several more neighborhoods in eastern Rafah as it steps up its operations in the southern city. These are the latest pictures of some of the tens of thousands of people fleeing. Israeli planes dropped leaflets and also sent text messages advising them to head to what it calls a humanitarian zone on the coast. Journalist Iris Mackler is in Jerusalem with the latest.
We're seeing, as you said, leaflets, announcements from the IDF spokesperson, Arabic language spokesperson, telling Palestinians to leave. And Palestinians report explosions, that's gunfire and other explosions, almost constantly, and they are leaving. On Monday, we had reports of 80,000 Palestinians who had moved to the area that Israel says is a safer space on the coast. Today, those numbers within the last hour are reported as being as high as 300,000. UNRWA, which is the UN refugee agency, says that no place is actually safe in Gaza, and it's just very difficult to deliver food and other humanitarian aid. And of course, the medical services are still back in Rafah. That's the last main functioning hospitals there. Israel says or describes this as a measured response, and the reason it does this is because we have heard from Washington very openly in the past few days that what it wants is that there should be no large-scale Israeli military operation in Rafah. Nevertheless, this is a risk, there's no doubt about it. There's a lot of daylight, it seems, between parts of this leadership in Israel and the current administration in Washington. So we have yet to see whether this really is measured, what measured means as fighting continues and more civilians are displaced, and what it means for relations with Washington.
There are also questions about what this means when it comes to reaching a new ceasefire and hostage release deal right now. We know that those negotiations stalled. So how could this expanded ground operation in Rafah affect the chances of even reaching a new deal?
That's right. There was, as we've been reporting all the past 10 days or so, there were hostage talks in Cairo. They ended without a result. Now Israeli media is reporting today that the talks could resume in Doha sometime this week with no date to be set. But what we are also seeing is there's expanded fighting in the north of the Gaza Strip, and increasingly vocal criticism of the government from inside Israel, because they say that the only reason that the Israeli troops are going back into areas like Zaytun and Jabalia, which they had withdrawn from, is because Hamas has returned there too. So the old saying that nature abhors a vacuum is true in a war zone as well, and that's what the criticism is about.
That's Iris Mackler in Jerusalem. UN aid agencies have issued a new warning about the deepening humanitarian crisis in Gaza, saying the continued closure of 2 key border crossings is cutting off vital supplies.
The food program in UNRWA will run out of food for distribution in the south by tomorrow. That means that people will be left only with what has already been distributed in their shelters, in their homes, and on site. As of today, we have 12 bakeries supported by humanitarian partners here in South Gaza. 8 have ceased to operate due to lack of fuel in stock, and 4 that are still operating at reduced capacities will be out of that stock by Monday.
Rachael Cummings is the Gaza response team leader for Save the Children, and she says the humanitarian situation there has reached a crisis point.
The situation is desperate for the people in Gaza and currently the people in Rafah. On Monday, the first evacuation orders were issued to certain areas within the eastern zones of Rafah. Adjacent to our office was one of the zones, and the panic and the desperation of the people who are desperately trying to flee. They are making impossible choices. There is nowhere safe to run to. There are no spaces. There are no services for water, sanitation, food, hygiene. It's really a desperate situation that people are facing. When we left Rafah to relocate our office and our team on Tuesday, the people on the streets was extraordinary. People hanging off vehicles, vans, donkey carts, cars, absolutely full of people and their items trying to get out of Rafah. We returned to Rafah on Wednesday to empty the remaining items from our warehouse, including nutrition commodities for children to continue treatment in Deir al-Balah. And the situation was even worse than the day before, which is an extraordinary context that we're facing. So people are desperate. People have nowhere safe to go. And today, more evacuation orders have been issued. So yet more people are trying to flee the war to find anywhere that they can say that they are safer than they would be staying in Rafah.
Just that panic scramble that you described there, as we're looking at images of people with what they have left of their belongings trying to get to safer ground. I can imagine what that is like for you and the impact on you and your colleagues who are doing work there on the ground. And as you mentioned, you were there earlier this week. For those who are not able to get out, what are they facing? Desperate times. People, as I said, are making desperate choices. People have elderly relatives, people have disabled children, they're unable to move, but they have nowhere to go to. So they're facing a conflict on their doorstep or on their houses. They're facing impossible choices where there is no clean water to drink, no food to continue surviving. So it's really desperate. And of course, the children, when we were driving through Rafah and also the outskirts now of Deir al-Balah, are packed with people trying to find somewhere to stay. There are thousands of children desperately trying to keep up with their relatives on foot, hanging out of vehicles parked on donkey carts. And for the children, it's a very frightening, terrifying situation for them to have been in for months now. Humanitarian aid is a big concern and has been for quite some time. How difficult is it to get aid in? And for the aid that does get in, how hard is it to distribute? It's nearly impossible. It's nearly impossible. So on Tuesday, the two main arteries for supplies into Gaza were closed. So that's through the Rafah Gate in the south and Kerem Shalom in the southeast of Gaza. Those are our only entry points for aid deliveries to come through. And for Save the Children, that includes medical supplies, food, hygiene kits, shelter kits, for people fleeing the violence. We currently have 8 trucks in the queue waiting to come across the Rafah crossing or the Kerem Shalom border. That is not moving. 6 of those trucks are medical supplies to provide life-saving medical interventions for the population. So the supplies into Rafah are inadequate at best, and right now they are impossible. Once they've come into Rafah in previous months, the complexity of then getting supplies out of Rafah and up to the most vulnerable populations being in the north. Incredibly, there are more vulnerable people in the north of Gaza. It's nearly impossible to get supplies through the various checkpoints up to the north of Gaza. I know you and your colleagues and so many who are doing the work that you're doing on the ground are obviously very passionate about what you're doing, especially watching all of these scenes unfolding right before your very eyes. Talking specifically about your organization, though, Save the Children, were you ever afraid for your safety? And at what point does it become too dangerous to stay? Yeah, very good question. We've been preparing for this moment for months. We knew that this scenario would probably, the high probability of this scenario playing out in terms of the ground invasion into Rafah in the south following the previous invasions of Gaza and Khan Yunis. So we had been very prepared for this event and we activated our relocation plan and it went very well because we had been prepared. We'd already identified an office and a guest house for the international staff in Deir al-Balah. But of course, we are here to deliver humanitarian aid. And without access to populations that has some degree of safety and security, it would become impossible for us to remain in Gaza. But for now, we are able to continue delivering. And the reason we have relocated our team and our office to Deir al-Balah is in anticipation of the nearly 1 million people that are going to be forced out of Rafah for us to be able to continue providing the essential services, the nutrition services, the health services, provision of water and sanitation, all of the life-saving essentials that populations are desperately in need of. But we know we are inadequate to meet those massive needs. For the whole humanitarian community, we are inadequate. Rachael Cummings, thank you so much for your time. Rachael is a Gaza response team leader with Save the Children.
Thank you.